Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be doing a video, since it's a bit of a slow news day. We're going to be doing a video about kind of just the idea of certain types of films being timeless. Now, as a definition, basically, the idea that a film doesn't age with the audience. The idea that you can watch a film that was made in 1950 today and it still is a good film. It hasn't. Time has not taken away from it. And there aren't a shit ton of movies that are like that. I mean, there are a decent amount. Don't get me wrong, but as opposed to all the films that have been released over the course of time, a lot of them are dated in a sense when you watch them today versus when they were made. You can watch certain types of older war movies, stuff like that. Those types of films are very dated today, especially with the way we have modern war films. But I'm just going to kind of go over really what I think makes a film timeless. And again, it's kind of a subjective thing. It's more of an opinion. I think that it holds true when you look at a lot of films that people would call timeless movies. And it really has to do with the relationship between the film's motivations and how that relates to the audience. Because when you're making a film and your character does not have, realistic, they don't have realistic motivations or issues or things like that, something that can be related back to at a human level, then you have a little bit of a disconnect between that character and the audience. But again, that's something that doesn't necessarily need to be there with certain films. But it does help relate the character. And I go back to a movie like Casablanca, where Humphrey Bogart's character of Rick is in love with Ingrid Bergman's character of Ilsa, but the whole idea is that they were kind of, they had their shot, they had their chance, and now it's kind of passed, and now they're meeting up again, and it's kind of the idea of lost love, and I feel like everybody who's ever had that happen to them, at the sense of, it's almost like the idea, especially at the end of the film, with the idea of if you love something, let it go. That's sort of an idea. And I think it's the idea that, people have to, when they're in a relationship, that they know, even though they love each other, the idea that they don't necessarily, they know it's probably not going to work out. The idea that maybe you should let that person go and find another or do something like that, even though you do care for them. That's really what that movie, the base idea or the base relationship between those two characters is. Because we know that Ilsa is still married to her previous husband, even though she thought he was dead and he wasn't. We know that she left Rick on the train in France as the Nazis were approaching, and just left him with a note, and he never understood why, and she just kind of cut him off, and he has unresolved issues about that. And he's basically closed himself off on a personal and emotional level because of that. And that's why we're able to relate to those characters, is because they have very human emotions and they're complex on an emotional and character-driven level. But then you can also look at other films that people would consider to be timeless, stuff like The Wizard of Oz. And I know I'm mentioning a lot of older films, but The Wizard of Oz from 1939, and that is that movie, I think, is more timeless because of what it shows. Because it's one of those movies that feels almost like a Grimm's fairy tale, that kind of an idea where it's almost like it's kind of horrifying in a way. It's very dark in certain spots, the witch melting and the house landing on the other witch and all the stuff about, killing Dorothy and all this other kind of strange, messed up stuff that happens in that movie. It's very much like a Grimm's fairy tale. And I think that relates to people on more of like a child level or a childhood level. And a lot of people do watch that movie when they're children for the first time. And it's a movie that takes place almost entirely in fantasy. It's the idea of you've escaped. It's the movie itself is escapism, which is kind of funny, where the Dorothy, the main character, is transported by this twister, and she's transported off into this magical land of Oz. And she doesn't really know how she got there or what's happening, but she knows that she's in this world where all these what appear to be magical creatures and stuff exist. And all of these people are caricatures of people that she knows in real life, and they all have the same kind of flaws and issues, or perceived flaws and issues, I should say. And I think that's the other thing, too. Again, going back to the relatability, we can relate to the idea of somebody, learning to stand up for themselves, like the Cowardly Lion, or somebody learning to care for others, like the Tin Man, or somebody learning to think for themselves, like the Scarecrow, or even just somebody looking to just find their way home, like Dorothy. It's very, very basic, but it does speak to people on a certain level because they are basic problems or basic things that people either have to overcome or deal with. Um, and I think that's why that movie is so timeless, in addition to the escapism aspect of it. Because, again, even though the first part of the movie takes place in Kansas and you're introduced to, like, the 1930s-esque type of Kansas that there was, once you go to Oz, it's a completely different world. And it doesn't matter if you have a cell phone in Oz. It doesn't matter if you have, Bluetooth wireless headphones or something like that. It doesn't matter. You're in Oz. It doesn't matter anymore what you have. And I think that, again, that's something that, if you were to put somebody who was a modern girl in that type of a scenario, the same that Dorothy was, I think that you could still have almost the same movie, maybe just obviously change up the lines and stuff a little bit, but you could have the same movie. And I think that's what makes it timeless in a sense, is that you could have that take place at any point or time, and it's still Oz. It still works the same. Um, but again, that's just kind of the idea of that. But again, more the character motivations, I think, that actually compound that from that sense. But moving forward, even going into films from like the 70s and the 80s, I think Blade Runner is a timeless film. And again, that takes place in a science fiction universe that does not exist. But again, the idea is human, even though the story is about a man hunting down machines, rogue androids, or replicants, as they call them in the film. The replicants are almost more human than people because they're almost like infants. They're almost like teenagers, and they're trying to deal with these fluctuating emotions. They oftentimes they have very drastic mood swings and things like that because they're acquiring memories, and through acquiring memories, they're acquiring experiences, and through those experiences, they're developing emotions. And it speaks to people on a level of, a lot of times, I myself included, and I think everybody can probably equate to this. We have emotions that we can't bottle up. We have emotions that we can't just kind of leave by the wayside. And these characters, or at least the android characters for the most part, are living with their hearts on their sleeves. Some of them might be evil or maniacal or do very bad things, but we understand their motivations. Their motivations are to simply live. Because their life expectancies are supposed to be only 5 years, so their bodies are starting to degrade and shut down. And the idea that they are just a living thing that is trying to continue living, that is a base thing for every living thing that exists on this world. The idea to keep living, unless, obviously, you can have exceptions to that in certain species like humans, but the idea is that they don't want to die. They want to continue on. And again, that is such a base human instinct. And on top of that, again, because it takes place in a science fiction universe, even though some of the stuff in it might seem a little bit outdated, like the void comp test and stuff, like the digital screens and things like that, ultimately the story takes place in a world that does not exist, but still operates on some of the same principles as our own, at least in a sense. So it's relatable enough, but at the same time, it is removed from reality enough where you could show that film to anybody at any point in time, unless you're actually living in a time period where there's flying cars and shit going around, but any point in time, and they could get immersed into that world and understand the characters because of the humanity of it. But that's just kind of my opinion on what makes a film timeless, and some of the examples from movies that I enjoy. But I want to know what you think. What is a timeless film to you? What does that mean? And what timeless films do you really like? As usual, put your thoughts in the comments below. I like to read them. Make sure to hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?